Another interesting legal case, a legal battle pitting arms control against free speech in the digital age. Perhaps it focuses on this, a 3D printable gun made mostly out of plastic. 2 years ago, the creator of the so-called Liberator posted what may be the first online instructions for how to build it, how to print your own 3D gun. The State Department wasting no time in threatening Cody Wilson, who you're seeing on your screen, with criminal charges and massive fines for possibly breaking the rules on exporting military information. Now Wilson is suing, claiming the feds are violating his right to free speech, online. Let's talk about it with Rebecca LeGrand, a defense attorney, and Lawrence Walters, a freedom of speech attorney as well. Nice to have you both. Lawrence, why is this a free speech issue?
It's a free speech issue because 3D prints and these so-called CAD files are expressive works that are presumptively protected by the First Amendment like all other software code. And the government is trying to use their munitions export regulations in an attempt to block the distribution of this otherwise protected speech. They're not providing any sort of judicial review or any kind of procedural safeguards which would be required in order for the government to censor or block other forms of communication. So this is essentially a textbook prior restraint on speech.
Let me go back to something you said, the CAD files, and I know that might come up when we're talking about it. What exactly are CAD files for our viewers?
Right, so they're computer-assisted design files. Essentially, it tells the computer how to design an object or assist in designing an object. And it's really no different than source code or object code that's used by a computer to display something on a screen.
All right, so Rebecca, the State Department says, listen, this isn't okay because this is essentially the same as trying to sell guns to Mexico, because you're giving people within their own ability with a computer and maybe a click of the button the possibility of printing their own gun. And we have to limit that. That's what the State Department says. Does the State Department have an argument, and what about the argument back about limiting free speech online?
Absolutely. The government has an interest in restricting the sale and the distribution of guns overseas. So they have a real interest here. And the question is, how do you balance that government interest? It's quite legitimate against the right to free speech. And I would question whether posting a blueprint essentially online is expressive speech. I would argue it probably has an element of that, but it's also got an element of just straight manufacturing that makes it different than what is at the core of the First Amendment, that makes it different than something that's just about expressing a viewpoint. So I think the government has a real interest in regulating this and will probably be allowed to, at least to some extent.
Lauren, so one of an intellectual property lawyer quoted in a few of these pieces that we have on this says this: the ability to download a file, press print, and have gun parts come out could also tip some judges towards calling gun CAD files, as you mentioned, functional things and allowing the government to regulate them. So the argument is that this is not about free speech and being able to express yourself online. It's a functional, actual thing that you're putting online, and therefore the government has a right. What do you think to that?
I think that that's a better argument, frankly.
If the government makes that argument, I would suspect that the response is that there are plenty of instructional things like textbooks or instruction manuals, even the anarchist cookbook, which has been found to be protected by the First Amendment and taught people how to construct guns. There are plenty of similar instances where these instructional manuals have been found to have First Amendment protection. And just because we're dealing with something in a digital format, in a new medium, should not deny First Amendment protection. And
that's one of the arguments, Rebecca, from specifically this young man who came up with the 3D gun, saying this is coming after high-profile shootings. The government's trying to crack down on him specifically. There's so many other things that are bad out there on the internet that this is not right to just go after him because of a 3D gun. Does he have a point? To Lawrence's point as well, there's a lot of bad stuff online. Why would the State Department focus on this?
Well, they're enforcing a specific regulation that they think applies here. And I really do think a file for a 3D gun is different even than the anarchist cookbook. What's the viewpoint? What's the expression in something that's just a straight piece of code explaining how to print?
But is that the same as a recipe? Is it the same as the recipe? I mean, for argument's sake, because essentially now you have a recipe online and more or less you can just follow it and make something. Now their argument is that it's 3D prints that you can actually plug into your computer, you don't do anything and you have a gun, Rebecca. But is it, if someone said to you, listen, Rebecca, it's the same as the recipe, you would say what?
I would say it is a continuum, no doubt, and there may be some expressive to even just posting a blueprint, but it may be minimal or much less than the kinds of things that would require a complete prohibition on restraint in the way that a book, a political manifesto, the government can't tell you you can't share your views, but this is different.
Well, Lawrence, you can find, as you point out, a nuclear weapon. Some say you can go online and you can figure out how to build a nuclear weapon online. So, and Cody's saying, I'm being singled out. Do you think, Lawrence, that he's being singled out by this administration specifically because of anti-gun control? You know, they're really against guns, anti-gun. That's what his argument is. Do you think he is being singled out?
Well, you know, oftentimes people who look for attention tend to get it from the government. You know, he was hard to ignore given the things that he put online and the attention that he generated. But he does have a point, a broader point, and that is that the government should not be free to pick and choose what instructional manuals and what information should be available to online users. And if they are going to try to do that, they at least have to create some specific criteria that the courts can look at to determine whether they're acting fairly and not discriminatorily, as is alleged in this case.
And that is what he is alleging. Rebecca and Lawrence, it's great to have you both. It's an interesting case. We'll see what happens from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.